You're listening to Radio Raim, and I'm very happy to speak to Squarepusher, aka Tom Jenkinson. Hello and welcome.
Hello there.
Hello, be up a hello, as your album title says.
Indeed, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the motto for the day.
Yes. Can I actually start from that? Because the title sounded funny, and also,
Mm.
in my view, it collided with the fun feeling of the album.
Okay. Well, it's a phrase that I associate with an old friend of mine in particular. We were a group, and like a lot of groups as kids, you develop your own phrases and even your own words and some kind of personal kind of dialect, I suppose. And the album is dedicated to a friend of mine who very sadly died a couple of years ago. So it was partly in order to consolidate that dedication that the title reflects some of the kind of things that we used to say to each other. So it's a kind of a personal phrase, but it also felt good as the title. It felt kind of positive and, as you say, quite fun. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, because the album sounds like very similar. I'm not the first one to say this, I suppose, very close to the range of sounds and the style you were playing in the first part of your discography.
Mm.
After doing so many different things over the last few years, like you've been experimenting in jazz and classical. So, is this something you felt you needed at this point in your career?
Well, as I say, a couple of years ago, my friend died, and it was a dreadful shock. But there was also, a couple of other things at the time which conspired to make the early part of 2018 quite a difficult time for me. And
Okay.
and one of the ways really over the years that I've dealt with difficult times is through writing music. It's obviously has a number of different functions in my life, but one of those functions is as a form of therapy. And so at that point, I felt a bit kind of knocked around by conditions and of events. I broke my arm as well, which meant I couldn't play, and that was really shocking because obviously guitar is very, very central to my life, let alone my music. I mean, it's very much like part of my day-to-day existence. So I just wanted to return to something comfortable, to something easy, something fun, and something straightforward. And you know, in some ways, that inclination was associated with getting back to the times and also the equipment that I used to use when Chris and I, this is the chap in question to whom the record is dedicated, just the equipment that him and I explored together. He was a very technically minded guy, you see, so we spent a lot of time investigating drum machines and synthesizers and samplers when we were kids, trying to work out how all this stuff worked. So it was partly in order to just somehow celebrate those times that I returned to using this old gear. And, I mean, you're right, there's obviously a correspondence on that basis with some of the music I did in the past. Of course, I've tried at the same time to bring some innovation, some fresh thinking to this equipment and the musical ideas, because really for me, like to offer up something retro, I don't think that's not my style. I always want to keep moving on,
Yeah.
but I think there is a familiarity and a sort of warmth to this set of recordings, which is, it's partly to do with that
Yeah.
rootedness in the earlier part of my work. Yeah.
Yeah, and after all, as a fan, I can say there's very few people who can do this sort of stuff better than yourself. So
Oh,
it was
thanks.
it was a pleasure to listen to it. And actually, yes, there's some new elements, subtle elements, I suppose, you try to apply to this range of styles,
Yeah.
the tracks on the album. But I was also struck by the fact that you used a Commodore VIC-20 as a
Yeah,
drum
yeah,
machine, which is a very old machine, uh,
it is.
maybe from the 80s.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this is, part of that first generation of home computers. And at around about the same time as I started work on this group of tracks, which became the album, I felt that I just wanted to access that sound world. It's got a very peculiar kind of tuning that's not really based in chromatic or diatonic systems of harmony. It's actually based on a purely mathematical principle, and one which isn't oriented towards specifically giving even tempered pitch. So it gives you this quite peculiar sort of otherworldly scale if you use it, and as well as that, there's a kind of brutal abrasiveness to the sound, and I thought I really wanted to access that, so I wrote a program on it and designed a system to convert from MIDI data, which is the standard way of communicating digital information in a electronic music studio, converting from this to a custom format so that the VIC-20 could speak to the world again, you know, after 40 years or however long it lasted it. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it crops up in various places on the record. It's not, you know, I mean, I didn't make it like the basis of the record, but it's just I wanted to have it at my disposal as a sound source if it felt appropriate.
Yeah, and also talking about sound brutality, using the term you just used, I also feel like some of the tracks around the end of the album, like Terminal Slam and Make Left Bass, are harder and harder. It's like a growing curve. Until 80 Ondula is like the end track of the track listing. So was it something you had in mind, like make a progression through the tracks?
Well, the basis, as I said, was quite informal on these pieces. It started out just wanting to have fun and to have some good times, basically, after some difficult times, and just to start just recording quite a flippant way, you know, not trying to do anything original, not trying to do anything with any real sort of purpose, like records in mind, you know, not thinking really of putting anything forward to the public, just doing this on a personal basis only. But it started like that, and but the pieces over time, you know, I spent a lot of time in this mode, and I was doing like a track every day or something like that, and then over time they developed, and I started wanting to spend more time with the pieces. And so in the end, I was spending, you know, more like kind of 3, 4, 5 days trying to, you know, getting more substantial and more development into the pieces. But in terms of the actual order of the pieces on the record, I mean, that set of pieces on the record was selected from the group of pieces that I made during that time. So
okay.
The pieces weren't made in an order to produce that narrative that you perceive on the album. That was just constructed afterwards. So that I just put the pieces in that order because I felt that was the most sensible order. It gives an interesting journey for me. It's not always like that. Sometimes records are written from start to finish in that kind of serial mode, if you like, from start to finish in sequence. But this was selected from a much bigger group of tracks, you know, like 40 or 50 pieces, and I just picked the ones that I felt worked best together and that made a good story.
You're listening to the music by Squarepusher on Radio Raim, and from his latest album, Be Up a Hello. And there's also a new EP which is out now, titled Lamental, and I'd like to ask you about that also because it features one of the very same tracks which is in the album tracks list, which is Detroit People Mover. I'm also going to ask you about the video for the track, but how would you introduce the EP and why releasing it straight after the album?
Well, so the broad idea behind this set of pieces, and it's reflected in the title, is that each one of these pieces in one way or another is a form of a lament, a piece of music that's expressing some kind of sorrow. Okay, so every piece on that record has some basis in this kind of thinking towards music. You know, again, you know, like I said with the album, you know, there can be any number of different ways of functions and desires that you might impose on music. But another one for me is similar, I guess, in ways to the album, but it's a way of interpreting difficult times. So Lamental, the title itself, derives from the word lament.
Yeah. And I understand Midi Sans Frontières was originally composed by you as a response to what happened with the Brexit referendum. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, I mean, it's not sort of really specifically to do with the result of the referendum. It's actually much more to do with the fact that during the campaigning for obviously there were the two sides in the campaign, but I felt actually that this was a real low point in the political life of this country, and that there was a lot of incitement to racism and xenophobia in order to build up support for a particular cause in that referendum. And I thought this was really disgusting. And of course, as a private individual, I can't really do much about these things. But as I say, in my world, if something makes me feel terrible, then there's, at least I have my music, and it's a way of trying to encode that feeling and trying to get through it, form a sort of response of some sort. And actually, like that piece in particular, because I felt that there was some of the campaigning was so divisive, so negative, and about trying to divide people into groups, us and them, and all that stuff. That I actually wanted to do something that was contrary to that and offer up a collaboration like across borders, which is, again, why it refers to the Sans Frontières. But also, when I made the piece, I offered up all the musical information, so in a score and all in recordings broken down into individual instruments, and the MIDI information and so on, and I offered it up to everyone who wanted to take part to make an interpretation, make a version of it. So it was like a collaborative project as much as it was an individual piece.
Yeah. Also, there seems to be a French theme because some of the titles are in French. The opening track is the Paris track, which is a sort of accelerated version of Detroit People Mover. So was it something again, why having this sort of theme, or is it, well, am I looking too deep?
Well, it's a good observation. I couldn't say that there's actually some specific overall thing. It's more a coincidence, to be absolutely honest with you, because Midi Sans Frontières itself, even though yes, it's in French, it's also a kind of spin on Médecins Sans Frontières, which is a medical organization, I'm sure you know. So it was really like trying to just taking that as a sort of a starting point and then modifying the title so it fitted my work. So the fact that was French was incidental. So that really doesn't have much. Although in a way, although conversely, again, it felt fighting in the right kind of spirit against this divisive rhetoric to offer up something in a different language, in a very sort of tokenistic way that felt good. But yeah, I mean, and then, there's degrees to which I can talk about this. Some of this is quite personal stuff, so I kind of, probably will just keep that personal if you don't mind. But I mean, the Paris track relates very, very sort of strongly to the city. It's something I've not talked about at all, and I'm just going to dive in and do it. But it was my response at the time to the 2015 attacks. And it's obviously this very, very sorrowful, tragic event. And, what can a man do at my distance? But again, making this piece was part of my response to that tragedy. So I didn't offer it up to the public at the time because I thought it's just inadequate. It's not needed. But there you are. That's the connection in the title.
Yeah. Once again, that track, as I just said, is Mutation on Detroit People Mover, which is a bit of a quiet oasis in the track list of Be Upper Hello,
Yes.
So I'd like to ask you, first of all, is it a track? I'm talking about Detroit People Mover now. Is it a
Yes.
track with a special meaning for you? And also, obviously, I'm going to ask you about the video clip, which has been
Yes.
just released and directed by Jacob Hurwitz Goodman. And it's a very interesting video clip, especially
Mm.
to watch at during these days of quarantine.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There's a absolute steadfast musical connection between Detroit People Mover and the Paris track, to the point where I I don't know if I was wondering about the titles, but it just got so complicated, like calling it Detroit People Mover and then like Paris track mix, and just ended up like with these stupid, massive, long titles that felt clumsy, and
Okay.
people, and as you've already perceived it, people can hear that link anyway. There's a link in the harmony,
Yeah.
so that's the important part. As far as Detroit People Mover, the track, I mean, again, this has personal significance, but that's kind of, I'm going to leave that on the personal side, if you don't mind. But regarding the video, this was kind of fascinating and strange and heartbreaking, I think, because years ago I went to Detroit and I noticed this light railway system, which I had to check out, and it's this kind of strange, neglected transport system around the downtown of the city. And
which is a train with no driver.
Precisely, it's like an autonomous train.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very strange because it just runs in one direction around the downtown. It's like you kind of can't sort of quite picture how it got off the drawing board, because it doesn't seem to make that much sense. But it's also quite charming. And if you're in the city, it's a great way to just do a tour of the downtown area. It's like, because it's all raised up in the above ground. You've got great views. It's interesting and quite fun. But it's also this neglected kind of relic. And I felt like there was a correspondence for me in the harmony of that particular piece. I was trying to refer and make sense of some of my Detroit influences. I'm very, very fascinated by the music of Detroit over the years, and it's a series that I think I initiated in 1993, and I've made several pieces over the years that make very direct reference to the music of Detroit, and this is another one in that series. But I just wanted to just somehow tie it in with the city a bit more. So we had this idea with the train. I thought, well, maybe there's something can we do with the train. And also I like the fact that it's the people mover. It's like that, okay, that it's obviously in the sense of the train, this is a transport system. It moves people. But I'm also talking about the fact that hopefully this piece of music is moving for people in the sense of emotionally moving.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of double meaning in there that I'm having a bit of fun with. And anyway, the city, yeah, I mean, by the time we came to film it, the city was under lockdown. So we produced this very strange kind of representation of the city that came to have quite a kind of poignant effect, I think, because the director had this idea of producing images that reflected the city's past. But one of the things that you really notice in the images is human contact and human proximity. And friendship and love between people, and this is the sort of thing that we're now, it's become a social impossibility to interact freely, and it's come to, through some sort of mixture of intention and coincidence, it's come to this quite dreadful poignancy, I'd say. So interesting anyway, and quite satisfying, strange piece.
So this was Detroit People Mover from Squarepusher on Radio Raim, and we're talking about Squarepusher's music with the artist himself. I'm curious to ask you about your first musical experiences, because they look quite peculiar reading your biography.
Oh, yeah.
I understand you were listening and getting to know organ music while at school, and also learning guitar was one of your first musical experiences, also because you were going to school with a guy which eventually became a famous guitar player. So
Yeah, 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 yeah.
how did you eventually end up making electronic music? Because that's
Yeah.
obviously sounding very strange.
Strange mixture. I mean, for me, music is just an incredibly broad church. I mean, I like everything from brutal atonal power electronics to the sweetest choral music. You know, there's not really any sort of specific formula other than I have to like it. You know, I come from a background of um, getting into music on the basis of enthusiasm. I didn't have a musical education, so I've always just followed my nose. I've always just gone for the things that caught my ear and in some way generated interest, and that's how it's always worked for me. I just follow the things that appeal to me on an intuitive basis. So, yes, organ music was a big part of my early story. Likewise, as you said, I went to school with Guthrie Govan, an absolutely incredible guitar player, like a major influence on me in that period of my life, and a real example to follow. You know, I mean, his extraordinary technique even when he was 14 years old. You know, and so. But also electronic music, and it's funny, you know, you mentioned that because it was at some point, you know, I do remember that thought, thinking, well, you know, in some ways the not specifically Guthrie actually, but other people who are you know, the people I looked up to at the time when I was starting out learning playing guitar, like 11, 12 years old. You know, electronic music was kind of deemed false. You know, it was fake, like an artificial, empty music, and it was cheating as well. You know, like I remember specifically drummers in the 80s would often say drum machines are kind of cheating. It's false and it's pointless and it's also kind of probably a threat in some way. That's probably where some of that sentiment came from. It's a threat because it potentially is putting people out of business, which, you know, goodness knows anyone can relate to that. So that's, I guess, it was a particular mentality that I had to take head on and make sense of, because in the end I realized, well, I don't care. I don't care if it's false. I don't care if it's fake. I love it. You know, it just sounds good to me. And it's actually a great sound. It's inspiring. It's fun, and what's more, I want to try and see if I can do it myself. I want to see if I can build a music that actually doesn't care again about boundaries, and that if it's good, it's permitted. The only thing that is illegal is if it's crap. So, like, yeah, I mean, it was. I guess I was fighting through a strange situation where there was a lot of rules and a lot of ideas, which you know seemed to be, you know, basis of them was to generate restrictions, and in the end, that for me was just unacceptable. You know, I love these things, and that was worth fighting for. So yeah, I mean, and that's the same now. You know, like my interests vary from day to day. You know, sometimes I want to pick up a guitar, sometimes I just don't want to see this. I don't even want to see a guitar. You know, it's just, it varies on every day, and I feel like that really that's essential to kind of keeping. You know, really the fundamentals of this are that I have retained my enthusiasm. That is that. Without that, there's nothing. So my thinking is, you know, the best way to retain your enthusiasm is to go with what you love. You know, everything else is just hot air. You follow the thing you love, and the enthusiasm is with you every step of the way, and then you sort it.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any artists or any type of music that inspire you currently? I was reading you said in an interview that you're a great fan of Captain Beefheart and the
Oh yeah.
Last Replica, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean this is like that feeling when you go into a shoe shop, you know, and you look at 400 pairs of shoes, and you can't remember, you know, what even kind of shoe you like anymore. You know, like once you ask that question, my mind goes blank. But yeah, Beefheart, of course. I mean, Trout Mars's Replica is a kind of unique, incredible record and one of the things I find so fascinating about it is that it never sounds the same. Every time I put it on, it sounds different. There's always something new in it, and such an incredible kind of creation, really. And yeah, well, there you go. That's a good example, anyway.
You're listening to Radio Raim, and we're with Tom Jenkinson, Squarepusher, and we're talking about his music and also listening to some of his music recently released. And one of the things you made quite recently, and which made me very curious, was also collaborating with the BBC for creating music for a program for kids.
Oh, yeah.
How was it like as an experience? Because again, we're used to have you out of boundaries and completely eclectic, but this is something quite surprising still.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the offer came in, and I just immediately thought, I'm doing that. You know, I felt that it was the absolutely perfect thing for me to do at that point. I mean, I'm quite fascinated by music over the years that has been made specifically with children in mind, you know, even if it's like the theme tune for a children's program or music in a cartoon. It's a very sort of interesting and fascinating world, because I think actually children generally, you know, deserve a lot more credit than perhaps some people give them, you know, and that actually you can throw some really experimental music at children and they lap it up and they love it, find it exciting. I mean, I remember again, you know, talking about abrasive sounds, finding it thrilling when I was little, just hearing brutal sounds, you know, like industrial sounds, or sounds of like trains or factories. I used to live around the corner from the ball bearing factory in Chelmsford, in the industrial, sort of on the edge of the industrial part of the town, and it was incredible sort of machine sort of turning sounds, like sort of machining metal. So these really very kind of sharp and abrasive sounds. And I just wanted to see if what would happen, you know, because it seemed to me that the BBC themselves were being quite brave, actually, to be honest, given all the stereotypes associated with my work. They were being quite brave, you know, to ask me to do this. It was an experiment, I think, on their part. But it worked out, I think. I'm really proud of it. And I felt really fun to kind of do it. And, you know, kind of a lot of people have said, oh, yeah, I really like that stuff. You know, people who don't normally enjoy what I do, you know, so it's fun. And, yeah, an interesting experiment.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is there any specific project you're working on at the moment? And again, also, I'm curious to ask you if the Shoba Leader One band is going to come back.
Okay.
If you can play bass again, obviously.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, thankfully my arm did recover, but the band, again, it's like everything else. I try to keep things as spontaneous as possible, and try to keep the thinking away from big plans and big schemes and structures that get imposed on your time, you know, for years on end. Because needless to say, you know, I think that's a quite easy way for things to turn sour. So I try to keep things spontaneous. So I don't know about the band. I mean, it's quite possible that it'll be a vehicle for some ideas I come up with in the near future. But, you know, in all honesty, there are no plans right now. And in terms of things I'm working on, I'm just enjoying some unallocated downtime right now. Just obviously had a world tour cancelled.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess I'm doing what everyone else is doing, which is trying to make the best of the time. So we'll see what happens. There might be a new record out of it. You know, who knows?